Hi, this is Kim Eierman from EcoBeneficial, bringing you more useful gardening tips to help improve our environment. Today, I have the great pleasure of interviewing Pat Drackett. Now, Pat is the director of the Crosby Arboretum in Picayune, Mississippi, just an hour's drive from New Orleans. And I'm really interested in hearing what Pat has to say because Crosby Arboretum is the premier native plant conservatory in the Southeast. So, Pat, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Kim. I'm so excited to talk about the Arboretum.
Well, great. Well, I understand the Arboretum is now owned by Mississippi State University and operated by the Extension Service, but it has more of a history. And I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about how the Arboretum was founded.
Sure. In brief, our public garden was established to be a living memorial that was dedicated to L.O. Crosby Jr. And he was a local timber pioneer and forward-thinking philanthropist. He passed away in 1978, and to give back to the community, his family wanted to do something different. They wanted to establish a public garden, but they traveled the world basically to learn about what public gardens were all about, and they at some point decided that it had all been done before, and there was a moment that they talked about when they visited Mount Cuba, when they were told at the time in the early 80s that it could be a good idea to look to the region's native flora. And that is a beautiful garden, wonderful inspiration there.
Yes, Hogcast in Delaware. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I remember in the beginning, L.O. Crosby's daughter, Lynn Crosby Gamble, about 8 years ago when I started, she said she liked to think of the Arboretum not as an environmental education center, but as a place that celebrated nature. And I think that weaves into everything we do.
So, Pat, I understand that the Crosby Arboretum is the first fully realized public garden in the U.S. organized along ecological principles, which is a pretty amazing thing.
Yes, and our plants are displayed in communities that are typical of the South Mississippi ecosystem, and our mission is to preserve, protect, and display plants that are native to this Pearl River drainage basin. So we've planted over those 12,000 plants since we began planting the site in the early 80s.
Mm-hmm. And the garden formally opened when?
In 1986,
Okay.
It was formally open to the public.
Okay. And then Mississippi State took you over when?
In 1997.
Okay, fantastic. And how large is the Arboretum?
Well, where we are now at the Interpretive Center is a 64-acre property. We have about 3 miles of trails that pass through the three basic exhibits, and we have about 750 associated natural areas that we also make field trips to.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I was looking at some of the ecosystems that you have represented, and it's really interesting. It's like a hit list of things that are endangered. Your Hillside Bog sounds like a place that I definitely want to visit. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, you would never tear yourself away if you saw how beautiful the orchids are there in May, and it is a hillside bog that it's a seep. It's just a beautiful property. We burn that. We do prescription burning of that property, and it starts out with longleaf pine and at the top of the hill, and then it travels to down the hill to areas that have sundews and just beautiful wild plants.
And what's the best time of year to go see that bog?
Probably every time of year. In the spring, it's going to have spring blooms and be beautiful. And if it's been burnt, it's just so pretty when it comes back. The locals call the pitcher plant blooms buttercups. And when I first came here, I didn't know what they were talking about when they'd call up and say, "When are the buttercups going to bloom?" Because I said I'd never.
That's a weed.
I know. I said I haven't seen ranunculus here, and I don't know, but they're just beautiful. It's the yellow pitcher plant. It's the Sarracenia alata, and there's just one bloom after another out there. wonderful, wonderful area.
Now, you mentioned to me that for anybody who's interested, you can actually see a plant list on your by clicking on your website, the Crosby Arboretum website. There's an orange button that links to a special collections list on the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center database that's specific to Crosby Arboretum.
Correct.
So
yes.
that's and that covers looks like 239 of your approximately 300 native species. Is that right?
Yes, yes. There's some of the natural areas might have species that aren't seen here. We're basically a wet pine savanna, so we're limited to the intent of when the garden was designed was to display as many of the possible Mississippi plant communities that they could, and areas where we might have, say, since the history of the site, it was used once in the Depression times as a strawberry farm. The old drainage canals are great places that have been modified into the aquatic exhibit, and those areas where we've got just a little bit higher, we can grow things like needle palm or mountain laurel. I was amazed the first time I saw kalmia down here because
that surprises me.
Yeah, it is all the way down to the coast. I remember seeing one that grew about a mile from the coast in a nearby Mississippi. But it's just a wonderful. Different habitats were a great example for people who have wet areas. And when I did landscape design before coming here, that was a problem area that it was very difficult to find plants that will do in wet sites, parts of your property that stay wet all year round.
Yep.
So we have some good examples for that.
That's fantastic. So people can come and take a look and get some ideas for their own gardens.
Yeah.
And for those folks that are not familiar with prescribed fire, talk about what that is and why you do it.
Well, first of all, our site grounds manager is a certified burn manager also. And by burning aesthetically, when you look at the Savannah exhibit after a burn, you see nothing but a blackened field. And throughout the year, it's amazing what will come back in just 6 months. That is just giving people who visit the idea of what this land would look like. We represent the longleaf habitat, of which only about 3% of that habitat remains. And
longleaf pine, right?
Longleaf pine, yes. So in those olden days, the fire would just burn until it hit a stream or hit something where it couldn't go any further. And that was the plants in our savanna are fire adapted, and in that area there are so many just beautiful perennials and grasses that have learned to live with fire, coexist with fire.
Well, as you've pointed out, there are very few places to actually see longleaf forests that used to be very prevalent along the most of the southeast, and those were fire habitat. I mean, that they were natural fire areas, weren't they?
Yes, and pitcher plants too. And to answer your initial question, it puts nutrients back in the soil. And it does keep the underbrush down, so it maintains that. That's our management tool for the savanna, just to continually burn it.
And since the longleaf pine is adapted to fire, it doesn't burn up like you might expect if you didn't know better.
Right. That whole story is wonderful of how the young pine trees will shoot themselves up so quickly so that they get themselves out of the range of that fire, and they have the needles that protect that emerging bud. I mean, it's just a wonderful topic.
Now, you have a little hidden secret about where a lot of those pitcher plants came from. Tell us about where you got those pitcher plants.
I will. There's a Walmart down the road from us.
Walmart had a special on pitcher plants.
Well, when they were constructing that site, and the former director, this was before my time, but they made sure that they collected as many of the pitcher plants as they could, so they could have the bog here just have that appearance of the pitcher plant bog is amazingly beautiful, and it's the compilation of a lot of different rescue projects. We have some beautiful parrot pitcher plants that came from the construction of another mall area in coastal Biloxi area.
So a lot of the pitcher plants came from what was to be the Walmart site.
Yes, so
It's
they're preserved.
fascinating. And
Preserved.
yeah, and you indicated that sometimes people actually contact you if an area is going to be developed.
Yes, one of our members let us know about this mall area over in Biloxi that was pretty extensive, and the pictures we have of that bog area were gorgeous before it was developed. So we were lucky that we got in, and that's a funny story too because we were so excited to go in. It was just beautiful, and the day we got there, we realized, and we had permission to go on the property. I will make that note. We saw that they had mowed, they had bush hogged this whole incredible, like it was probably close to 50 acres. And if they had not, because people go, oh, it's so sad, but we would not have seen those little parrot pitcher plants because they're so short. So instead of getting things that we already had, we got these amazing plants that we wouldn't have seen otherwise.
That's amazing. So,
Yeah.
I looking at your plant list, there are a lot of things I recognize, but many things I do not. So it looks like you've got quite a collection of either rare or threatened or endangered species.
Yes, and we've got some orchids, a lot of the rare orchids, and one that is it's epiphytic. So there are many, like say the pine lilies, the Catesby's lily is a beautiful scarlet lily that pops up. It's very ephemeral, and in August and September we'll start getting calls on when are your pine lilies in bloom, and that's a wonderful perennial associated with that longleaf pine ecosystem, the wet pine savanna.
Now, I think it's very interesting that your arboretum gives the opportunity to see these species in a natural setting, exactly how you would expect to see that in nature. But most of your arboretum was developed, wasn't it?
It was, and a lot of people think that we just made trails through a beautiful property, but the reason we are so beautiful is because of a very meticulously designed master plan, and that guides everything that we do. It was developed in the early 80s by our first director, Ed Blake Jr., along with Andrew Pogon and Associates of Philadelphia, who consulted on the project. So there was a honor award given for the master plan in '91 to Ed and Andrew Pogon for that design. So it basically has divided the arboretum into about a third is the savanna exhibit, and then the remaining 40-odd acres of woodland, young woodland, was allowed to grow up, and we have about 3 miles of trails. So the exhibits that we build out today continue that vision that Ed had with that initial plan. So in the past 5-6 years, we've been building out 3 educational exhibits. The first was a gum pond, which is about a quarter of an acre of a beautiful gum pond. We dug a hole in the ground, and we walked away, and to watch it fill in with just all native species, and to see thousands of little sundews come up along the edge and all the plants and grasses that came in was just a phenomenal process to watch, just from that beautiful, smooth surface it was only a couple of feet deep, and to watch that populate back with all of the plants was amazing. Now we're lucky that we're in the middle of an area that has native species, so we didn't have to worry about the invasives that
Boy,
could
are
have
you
come
lucky.
in. Yes.
Now, for us Yankees, tell us what's in a gum pond.
There are gum trees in a gum pond.
And what are gum trees there, Pat?
Well, the funny thing is that down here in the South, people call gum can be sweet gum can be water tupelo, it can be black gum, but if for the Latin name, it would be Nyssa sylvatica, variety biflora. So that's mostly planted over 2,000 little whips, little bare roots that were installed in the gum pond about 4 or 5 years ago.
Okay.
And that we also have water tupelo out in our Piney Woods pond along the edge of the pond. What people don't realize is that all of our aquatic parts of the aquatic exhibit, the pond, the slough exhibit, the 1,000-foot long stream channel for our swamp forest. It was all man-made. So we, for instance, with the swamp forest, we took a drainage channel that was used for agricultural drainage during the strawberry era and just made that into a beautiful meander. And the reason we're able to do this is because of the relationship with Mississippi State University landscape architecture, because the students get a wonderful real-world experience of going out to local natural areas and studying the patterns, studying the trees that are there, the plants that are there, developing plant lists and designing, using that as the basis for designing the components of our educational exhibits.
Now, for folks that can't get down to Picayune in the near future, there's a great book by Bob Brusick about the Arboretum. Tell us a little bit about Bob and his book.
Yes, he decided that it was time to write the process down. He had been with the Arboretum for 13 years under Ed Blake, and he's now a full professor in the Mississippi State's Landscape Architecture Department. So he outlines the process of the design of the master plan, and I think really this could be used as a guide for others that seek to establish a park or natural area that would survive with very little maintenance, just the process of going through, analyzing what is going to fit to that property. So he talks about that process.
Even if you were in the Northeast or the Midwest, this is a book that would give you some ideas of how to do it regionally and locally, right?
Yes, it definitely has application, and so many projects in my career, I've seen so many well-intentioned people have projects that fail just because they do not fit the plants. They don't think of those ecological processes that are going on. And I think back to Ed would tell us that this was really the land expressing itself. You know, the land was telling, it was all about the land.
Now, the species, you mentioned that you've got about 12,000 plants that were planted, and that not even including the ones that came up as volunteers, the natives. But you don't water.
We don't water. We're so lucky. And I used to tell my clients when I did landscape design, when they'd ask about native plants, I'd say, those are the plants down the street in the vacant lot that are doing just fine while you're watering during the drought. So that's what we do here. We do not do anything other than plant and walk away, unless in the case that we have a memorial tree we're maybe taking a little extra care with. But we just make sure that we get it in the right place. We hope that we're making appropriate choices, and that doesn't mean to say that every one of those 12,000 lived. It just meant that we, did our best to cite it.
It's a matter of right plant, right place, but also timing the planting, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and because obviously your summers get pretty darn hot. So when do you typically do installations?
We try to do the installations in January and February and the dormant period of the year, of which we do not have a very wide window because we're in coastal Mississippi where it's warm and very warm now. But we have an Arbor Day sale. Our Mississippi Arbor Day is around the middle of February, so that's a good time to encourage people to plant natives. And we do have 4 big plant sales during the year to try to get people excited about their Mississippi species.
Oh, that sounds great. I wish I was closer by and lived in Mississippi.
Well, you need to plan a visit.
There are some, you've just mentioned, like Calmia latifolia is really interesting that you have that down there, Mount Laurel.
Oh my gosh, it's beautiful.
Yeah. Tell us about some of the other natural areas that you have. You have quite a few. What are some of your favorites?
We have another one called Steep Hollow that has some quaking bog on it. And if you want to see some great YouTube videos, just go look up quaking bog and see these people jumping up and down on a bog and watching the guy 10 feet away bounce up and down.
Wow.
They're areas that have filled up with peat and the water. It holds the water so that it is like a big water bed when you walk on it. But one of what we're doing is studying that area as a basis for a new educational exhibit, which will be the Quaking Bog exhibit here, part of our part of the Savannah exhibit and aquatic exhibit. It will be across from our pitcher plant bog in the south part of our site, and it will have a bridge that will go across the exhibit so that school children or visitors can bounce up and down on the bridge and feel that quaking effect.
Now, what plants grow in a quaking bog?
There are, well, first of all, sphagnum moss is definitely a major component, and I think may not be pronouncing it correctly. Peningularias, I think, the little, probably a lot of, and I have not studied the plant list extensively.
Okay.
I'll tell you that, but it's similar to what is in that area already, and just a very wet pine savanna. And I'm looking forward to learning more about those plants. And again, we're being assisted by Mississippi State's Landscape Architecture Department on designing that, and we will be planting it out in probably about a year's time.
Okay. And there's one area where you've got a mature beech magnolia woodland. That sounds really cool.
Yes. Now that is Mill Creek, and it did sustain some damage during Hurricane Katrina. There were beautiful big leaf magnolia in there also, and plants like the Alyssum floridanum, the red star anise grows in there.
I love that plant.
Yeah, and it just, I was so amazed to see that beech grows down here on the coastal south, that a little remnant of the glaciation pushing all the plants like the kalmia down here to the south, and they stayed. When it got colder, they ran in front of the cold weather, and some decided to stick around. Yeah.
And that area, you've got all 5 species of native magnolia, right?
Yes, they're still there, even though the canopy opened up some with the storm. Yes.
Okay, so hopefully that'll, start to recover. It's, it takes time with trees, doesn't it?
Yes, it's a slow process, but we like to think of, coastal resilience. The trees that are here, plants that were here, were adapted to those natural events. And
describe some other natural areas that you have.
Well, let's see. The one that we visit most frequently is that Hillside Bog, because it's close to us. Some of the others are located maybe an hour's drive. There is another one called Talawa that has absolutely beautiful longleaf pine stands and little seeps in there. And let's see.
So just to remind listeners, so you've got about 64 acres right there in Picayune, and then you manage about 750 acres in other parts of Mississippi.
Correct.
So you're quite spread out.
Correct. And nearby we have dead tiger, savanna, and...
dead tiger.
Yes. And you wonder,
What's that?
was there an escaped tiger from the zoo
what is that?
We didn't know about?
That's a type of ecosystem, huh? Dead tiger? Or is that a name of an area?
Dead tiger. I don't know how it got its name, and I wish I knew. But there is a savanna, and there's also a hammock that's very wet, and plants like let's see. There is a very rare plant that grows there. It's the pink coreopsis, the Coreopsis nudata, of which there, I think, are only 2 or 3 occurrences in the state. So that grows in wet ditches. It's a lot more prevalent over in areas of Louisiana, which have similar habitat. But for our state, it's very rare and just very beautiful. If you Google a picture of it, just to see, this pink Coreopsis growing in wet ditches, it's just an amazing plant. But that and the orange flowered milkweed called few flower milkweed, which is Asclepias lanceolata. It grows tall on these, last time I saw it there, it was probably, looked like it was between 4 and 5 feet tall.
Holy
really
moly.
Robust on these wiry stems, just so pretty.
So interesting that you mention milkweed, because I understand you're going to be doing some seed trials on milkweed.
Yes, and this was in response to all of the questions we started getting starting about a year ago about the which species can I plant, which native species can I plant. And in the local garden centers, it's very uncommon to find any native species. The butterfly weed, sometimes you can get it, but we realized that we couldn't answer that question completely. So we asked a field botanist who had experience with the Arboretum and inventorying the natural areas many years ago to develop a list of the species that would grow in Mississippi. We took those 15 native species and started doing extensive research on where they grew in the state, which were easily found and available. And we would like to give people an alternative to purchasing tropical milkweeds in the garden centers, which is the most commonly available here, and actually is being sold by some garden centers as being native. So
that's a very problematic plan, unfortunately, isn't it?
Yeah.
Encourages monarchs not to migrate.
There seems to be a lot of research that's pointing that direction. And so when you tell somebody that a particular plant you might not want to plant it, you have to give them an attractive alternative. So we're looking into the different species, maybe about a half dozen that I think have a lot of application or are commonly available, have a wide area of
what
where
are some of those?
Well, even though there is no state data for the Asclepias incarnata, the swamp milkweed, it is sold very widely. There are some name varieties and has great potential, according to both our state botanist and this field botanist that we consulted, that they think that there would be no reason that it would not do fine in our state. It's in every state around us, down into Florida. So I think that's one that really has merit. It's commonly available, it's available both wholesale, like if you want to buy a pound of it, as well as in a seed packet. And then there's another one, it's beautiful green antelope horns. It's also called, it's Asclepias viridis is the Latin name.
Green?
Yes, and it grows, it has wide application, I think, for garden use. It's a beautiful, robust, unusual color, and even though it grows in somewhat dry sites, there is not anything stopping us from putting it into regular garden soil, and we've heard that people have had success with this one too. Others, just the various varieties, I think, of the Asclepias tuberosa, the plain old butterfly weed, if people would continue to try that one. The Asclepias verticillata, which is world milkweed, is also available. You can get seeds of that, and plants of another one called swamp milkweed, which is also known as aquatic milkweed, which is the Asclepias perennis, and that one we've seen small plants for sale. So those are some suggestions, but we're currently working on a publication that will be available to the entire nation for download at our MSU Cares Extension website, coming out in early next year. So it'll have a table for all these species, and we'll rate them. This year in 2016, we've obtained as many of the seeds out there as we can. Very few of them are from the state, but I'm doing basically what any gardener would do that found out that, there's 15 species of milkweed available here that are native to Mississippi. What can I grow? So you would search the internet and see who's got seeds, who's got plants. Some commercial growers will have 72 plug trays that you can purchase. So that's a good way to get things started, projects started. And we're trialing in 2016 those species. And next year, we're hoping to trial all Mississippi collected from seed. So, through the Native Plant Society, go on field trips and get seed, collect seed, get seed from our Asclepias longifolia, which is the longleaf milkweed, grows in our bog, and the Asclepias lanceolata, that orange one, is also really proliferating in our bog.
And what criteria will you be using to evaluate these?
Well, we'll look at how easy. Now, the seed trials at the experiment station, they say that they do not baby them. They get them in. They run them all through a simple process, and that does make me wonder if you have species that like dry, say they like a dry prairie, and you're just doing a regular propagation or germination, is will it still do? So I think we'll just let them do the standard process with everything, grow them out into plugs. They'll have maybe between 3 and 5 plants, and they'll put it in a regular garden bed. So the seed trial actually is testing whether someone could grow it in regular garden soil, but the publication will also address people who have natural areas on their property, which species they would like to fit there.
And will the research touch on the attractiveness as host plants by species?
I would like to be able to list a rating or ranking of which plants were more attractive, because we do hear things like, if I've got incarnata in my garden and the regular butterfly weed, that they ignore the butterfly weed and they come to my incarnata. So I will gather as many colloquial stories that I can that will talk about the preference, and then see if I can find scientific articles that support which ones might have higher levels of that cardiac glycosides that make them resistant to predation. That's
fantastic. Well, that sounds like a great project. What else is happening at the Crosby Arboretum you'd like to share with us?
Well, if you're in the area, we have on our website, we have a full schedule of events and programs that, largely our programs are going to be focused on ways that people can garden with native plants, but we also have programs on wildlife, or you might come to learn about bats. You take a mushroom walk, learn to make a pine needle basket. So we have clay walks for the kids. They can go out and collect some of the natural materials and then use them to make impressions in clay. So we are something different every week. So if you visit the area, most of our events take place on a Saturday. We have some large events that are Piney Woods Heritage Festival is in the fall, and we have a spin-off from that called Forge Day. So at the end of January, we have about 7 or 8 metal workers that descend upon us. It's a great winter event because it's a time when not much else is going on, and it's watching blacksmiths work and knife makers craft knives out of the files, just like a file like you'd have in the garage.
So if you're making a trip to New Orleans or the region, to quick trip to the Crosby Arboretum, and for folks that are interested in taking a look online, the URL is crosbyarboretum.msstate.edu. And just a fantastic place. Pat, it's been a pleasure to speak with you and get to know a little bit more about you and the Crosby Arboretum. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for talking with me today. It has been great to talk about my favorite place.